The quiet of the night was shattered by the sound of frantic barking, a deep, guttural growl that reverberated through the stillness. At the edge of the forest, a German shepherd stood at the entrance of the house, his dark eyes scanning the shadows, his body poised for action. His name was Rex, and he had always been the protector. But tonight, the danger was unlike anything he had ever faced. His instincts screamed at him. This wasn't just any threat. This was something far worse, something that would test his loyalty and bravery in ways he could never have imagined. As the night grew colder and the wind howled through the trees, Rex's muscles tensed, his nose twitching as the scent of danger grew stronger. Every fiber of his being was alert, every hair on his back standing on end. The family inside the house had no idea of the peril that loomed just beyond the door. They had no idea that Rex, their loyal companion, was the only thing standing between them and an unknown terror. Then, the first crack of the window shattering echoed through the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps creeping closer, too close. Rex's fur bristled with urgency. He knew what he had to do. Without hesitation, he surged forward, barking fiercely, his body charging toward the looming danger. But what happened next would change everything. His bravery would lead him into a confrontation that would test everything he was. A confrontation that would reveal the unbreakable bond between Rex and the family he had sworn to protect. And as the night unfolded, his incredible act of loyalty would leave everyone speechless, proving that sometimes the purest form of love is not in the gentle touches, but in the fierce acts of devotion in the face of unimaginable danger. Jake Turner had always been a man of few words, preferring the solace of nature and the quiet comfort of a small-town life. But the death of his wife, Emily, had shattered his world. She had been the light of his life, his partner through thick and thin, and their two children, Caleb and Sophie, had been the living embodiment of their shared joy. When Emily passed away unexpectedly, leaving behind nothing but a devastating hole in their family, Jake felt like he had lost his purpose. After the funeral, Jake tried his best to maintain the normality of family life. He went through the motions for Caleb and Sophie, both of whom were struggling in their own ways with the loss of their mother. But Jake was lost in grief, lost in loneliness, and above all, lost in a deep fear that he might not be able to help his children heal. He had always been their protector, but now he felt more like a shell of the father he once was. One evening, as Jake sat alone in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, he noticed something unusual. A small, trembling pup had appeared in the backyard, its coat matted and dirty, its eyes filled with fear. It was a German shepherd, abandoned and alone, just like he felt. Jake didn't hesitate. He opened the door, and as if drawn by an unspoken connection, the dog limped toward him, seeking solace in the stranger who had unknowingly become his savior. Jake took the dog in, naming him Rex, not knowing how much Rex would come to change his life. What started as a simple act of kindness, bringing a dog into their home, quickly turned into something far deeper. Rex was more than a pet. He was the missing piece that Jake's family didn't even know they needed. With every passing day, Rex became not only a companion but a lifeline for Jake. His presence brought a sense of calm to the house, a feeling of safety that Jake had long since forgotten. Rex wasn't just any dog. His deep, intelligent eyes had a way of understanding Jake's emotions, almost as though he could read his mind. His loyalty was unwavering, and the bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. Rex had been through his own pain, his own hardships before coming into Jake's life. Abandoned and neglected, Rex had learned to fend for himself, to trust only his instincts. But something about Jake, something about the family, made him realize that he wasn't alone anymore. Rex's physical presence was commanding. Standing tall with a sleek, muscular frame, he had the look of a guardian, always alert, always on guard. But beyond his imposing stature was a heart full of love and devotion. There was a quiet strength in the way he would sit beside Jake after a long day, his head resting gently against his leg as if offering comfort in the only way he knew how. His protective instincts were razor-sharp, but it was his gentle nature that made him more than just a protector. He was family. Every evening after dinner, Rex would take his place by the fireplace, his eyes following the children as they played in the living room. Caleb and Sophie had slowly begun to heal, their laughter filling the house once more. Rex's presence seemed to make everything feel more grounded, more secure. He would nudge Caleb's hand when the boy was upset or rest his head on Sophie's lap when she was feeling down. To them, Rex wasn't just a dog. He was a brother, a best friend, a protector. Jake watched this transformation with quiet awe. He had never been one to express his emotions openly, but with Rex by his side, he began to feel the walls he had built around himself start to crumble. For the first time since Emily's passing, Jake allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild piece by piece, and Rex would be the key to helping them all heal. But it wasn't just Rex's loyalty that impressed Jake, it was his intelligence. Rex wasn't just a good listener. He could sense things that most people wouldn't notice. There were times when Jake would feel a deep sense of unease, when the darkness of his grief threatened to swallow him whole, and Rex would be the one to nudge him gently, pulling him back from the edge. He could sense when the children were feeling particularly low, and in those moments, he would become their comfort, their strength. His unspoken empathy was as much a part of him as his fierce loyalty. It was Rex's quiet acts of devotion, his ability to stay by their side through every tough moment, that made Jake realize just how special he was. Rex wasn't just a dog. He was a reminder that love could still exist even in the darkest of times. He was a living, breathing symbol of resilience, of strength, and of the healing power of loyalty. As the days went by, Jake found himself growing closer to Rex. He no longer felt like he was walking through life in a fog. With Rex at his side, he could face the tough days, the days when the grief would hit him like a tidal wave. He knew that Rex would be there, his constant presence a comfort, a reminder that life, despite its challenges, could still be good. And most importantly, he knew that Rex was there not just for him, but for Caleb and Sophie too. The bond they shared was simple, yet profound. It wasn't built on grand gestures or lofty promises. It was built on trust, on love, on an unspoken understanding that they would protect each other, no matter what the world threw at them. Rex had been through the darkness, and now he was their light. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Jake knew one thing for sure. His family was stronger with Rex in it. Together, they would heal. Together, they would face whatever came next, side by side. From the moment Rex stepped into their lives, everything had changed. What started as a quiet house had now become a place of warmth, of shared moments that carried a deeper meaning than words could describe. Every morning, as Jake woke to the sound of the children getting ready for school, Rex would be there, by his side, waiting for the day to begin. But it was the little things that made their bond so powerful. Each morning, Jake would shuffle into the kitchen, groggy and half awake, and find Rex already sitting at the kitchen table, his large, dark eyes watching him with a calm assurance. Rex didn't need to bark to greet him. It was a silent promise, a promise that no matter how difficult the day ahead would be, Rex would always be there to keep him company, to offer him the steady, unspoken support that only a dog like him could provide. Jake had always been the kind of man who kept his emotions close, buried deep inside where no one could see. But with Rex, it was different. The quiet moments, when Rex simply sat beside him, watching the children play or resting his head on Jake's lap, spoke volumes. It was as if Rex knew the weight of the world was on Jake's shoulders, and he didn't need to do anything other than be there. Sometimes, Jake didn't even realize he was speaking until he felt Rex's steady gaze on him, as if the dog was listening intently to every word, every frustration. And when the day was done, when the kids were asleep, Rex would always be there to offer comfort, his presence a silent balm to Jake's tired soul. One of the simplest, yet most meaningful, rituals they shared was in the evening when Jake sat by the fire. He would lean back in his chair, watching the flickering flames, his thoughts drifting to memories of Emily and how different things were now. But there, nestled beside him, Rex would settle in. He would press his warm body against Jake's leg, resting his head on his feet, looking up at him with eyes full of understanding. In those moments, Jake found peace. They didn't need to speak. The connection was enough. And for the first time in months, Jake allowed himself to just be in the moment. No guilt, no pain, just the quiet companionship of a dog who had become more than just a pet. Rex had become a part of the family. It was these quiet moments, the simple acts of being together, that spoke volumes about the bond they shared. Rex's loyalty was never in question. It wasn't just about him protecting the family from physical harm, it was about him protecting Jake's heart, his spirit, and the hearts of the children. He had become the constant presence in their lives, the one thing they could always rely on, even when everything else felt uncertain. But Rex wasn't just there for companionship. His protective nature had quickly become evident. It wasn't long before Jake realized that Rex was more than just a dog. He was a guardian, a protector in ways that went far beyond what Jake could have imagined. The first time Rex showed his true protective nature was a few weeks after the family had moved into the house. It was late at night, and Jake had just put the children to bed. He was downstairs, watching TV and trying to unwind, when he heard it, the soft, scraping sound of metal against metal. His heart stopped for a moment. The sound was coming from the back door. Rex, who had been lying on the rug near the door, was suddenly alert, his body tense, his ears perked up. Without hesitation, he bolted to the door, growling low in his throat. Jake's heart raced as he stood up, instinctively moving to the door. But before he could even reach the handle, Rex was already there, his body positioned firmly in front of the door. His growl grew deeper, more menacing, and Jake knew something wasn't right. Jake cautiously moved to the window, peeking through the blinds. In the dim light, he saw the silhouette of a man standing by the back gate. He was trying to pry it open, clearly unaware that someone inside was already on alert. Max's growl became more insistent, and Jake knew in that instant that this wasn't just a stranger, this was someone who meant harm. He had to act fast. "Stay back, Rex," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible as he grabbed the phone to call the police. But Rex, sensing Jake's unease, didn't need any instructions. The dog stood firm, his body a wall of muscle and determination, his gaze fixed on the back door. It wasn't fear that fueled Rex, it was the unwavering instinct to protect, to keep his family safe. His eyes never left the door, and for a moment, Jake simply watched in awe as the dog stood his ground. The intruder, sensing something was wrong, hesitated and took a step back. Jake used that moment to lock the back door, then moved silently toward the phone. As the police arrived moments later, they found the man still standing near the gate, nervously glancing around. He was arrested for attempted break-in, but the true hero of the night was Rex. Jake didn't even need to ask the question. He knew Rex had saved them, not just from harm, but from the lingering sense of danger that had haunted him since Emily's death. That night, Max's protective instincts were sharp, and they had kept the family safe. It wasn't the first time, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Rex was more than just a dog. He was a protector, and nothing was going to change that. The second time Max's protective nature emerged was even more intense. It was a rainy afternoon, and the family had been out for a drive, returning home from a visit to the grocery store. As they turned onto their street, Max started to growl low in the back seat, his body tense, eyes fixed on something ahead. At first, Jake didn't think much of it, but Max's growl deepened, becoming more insistent. When Jake glanced in the rearview mirror, he saw a man standing by the street, walking toward their car. The man's face was obscured by the hood of his jacket, and he was walking with an unusual purpose. Without thinking, Jake slowed down the car. Something didn't feel right. As they got closer, the man stepped into the road, blocking their path. Before Jake could react, Max erupted into a loud, ferocious bark, his eyes fixed on the stranger. It was as if Max knew something Jake couldn't explain. The man, startled by the sudden attack, backed away slowly, raising his hands defensively. Jake quickly accelerated, passing the stranger, and as they drove away, Max's body relaxed. He had been on alert the whole time, his protective instincts sensing the threat before Jake had even realized what was going on. Max didn't need to be told what to do. He knew, instinctively, when to act. It was in those moments that Jake realized just how lucky he was to have Rex by his side. His loyalty, his courage, and his unwavering commitment to protect had saved them more times than he could count. Max wasn't just a dog, he was family. And no matter what dangers lay ahead, Jake knew that as long as Max was with them, they would be safe. Their bond, forged in moments like these, was stronger than anything that could come their way. Rex was the silent protector, the guardian who had given Jake's family something they could never repay: peace of mind. And in the depths of Jake's heart, he knew that no matter what the future held, Rex would always be there. It was an ordinary evening, much like any other. The kind of evening where life felt calm and peaceful, where the weight of the day seemed to lift as the sun dipped below the horizon. The smell of roasted chicken filled the house, and the sound of Caleb and Sophie's laughter echoed through the halls as they played in the living room. For a moment, Jake allowed himself to relax. The day had been long, and he needed this moment of peace. But the feeling didn't last. As Sarah stood at the stove, stirring the pot of soup, she heard it, a faint tapping noise coming from the back window. At first, she thought it was just the wind, a branch brushing against the glass or some other harmless occurrence. The house had its quirks, after all. The windows creaked, the floors groaned with age, and sometimes the wind would play tricks, making strange noises in the stillness of the evening. But as she turned to glance at the window, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Max, who had been lounging lazily by the door, had suddenly become still, his eyes fixed intently on the window. His ears, usually relaxed, were now perked up, straining as if he could hear something Sarah couldn't. The muscles in his legs were tense, coiled like a spring, ready to move at a moment's notice. Max's gaze didn't shift from the window. Sarah's heart began to race, a sense of unease creeping over her. She walked cautiously toward him, her steps slow, careful not to make a sound. She reached out to touch Max's fur, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he let out a low growl, one that rumbled deep in his chest, a sound that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. It wasn't the kind of growl she had heard during playtime or even when Max was excited. This growl was different, filled with warning, filled with purpose. "What is it, boy?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Max's eyes never left the window. His body was rigid now, a statue of alertness. Sarah's pulse quickened as she took another step toward the window. She slowly pulled back the curtain, her breath catching in her throat. At first, she saw nothing, just the dark, empty backyard stretching into the shadows of the trees. But then, there was movement. A figure, barely visible in the dim light, stood near the fence, just on the edge of the yard. The figure was tall, cloaked in darkness, and Sarah couldn't make out any details of their face or body. All she could see was the outline of a person standing still, as if waiting for something. Waiting for them. Her hand trembled as she gripped the curtain. Max's growls intensified, his voice now full of urgency. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she quickly pulled the curtain shut, her mind racing. The person outside was too close to the house. She didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but her instincts told her something wasn't right. Max was still growling, his posture tense, ready for action. The hairs on the back of Sarah's neck stood on end. She backed away from the window, her eyes never leaving Max, whose focus was unwavering. For a moment, Sarah stood frozen, unable to move, unable to think. It wasn't until Caleb called from the other room, asking when dinner would be ready, that Sarah snapped back into reality. She quickly made her way to the living room, her mind still racing with thoughts of the figure outside. The feeling of unease lingered in the air, thickening with every passing second. Sarah tried to shake it off as she set the table for dinner, But her hands were shaky, and her mind wouldn't stop spinning. Was it just someone passing by? A late-night jogger or someone taking a shortcut through the yard? Or was it something more sinister? Something worse? Max's growls had not subsided. In fact, as the minutes passed, they only grew louder, deeper, more menacing. Sarah glanced toward him, but he was still fixated on the window. His tail was rigid, not wagging but held straight as a board. His eyes were narrowed, his teeth slightly bared. This wasn't just a dog's natural curiosity. It was the behavior of a dog who had sensed something dangerous, something that Sarah could not see, but that Max knew was there. She couldn't ignore it any longer. The fear in her chest was building, turning into something heavy, something she couldn't shake. She quickly excused herself from the living room, telling Caleb and Sophie to stay put, and headed back to the kitchen. She needed to see what was going on. She needed to be sure. As she approached the window again, she hesitated. This time, Max's growls were so deep, so intense, that Sarah could feel them in her chest. It was as though the dog could sense the danger before it had even fully materialized. She slowly, cautiously, pulled back the curtain, her breath held tight in her throat. And there, just outside the window, the figure was closer, much closer now. They were standing just beyond the porch, watching the house with an unnerving stillness. Sarah couldn't make out their features, but something about their posture, how they stood, how they watched, sent a chill down her spine. Max's growl escalated, turning into a full-on bark. His voice echoed through the house, a deep, thunderous sound that reverberated in Sarah's ears. And then, as if he could no longer hold back, Max lunged toward the door, his paws scratching against the floor as he sprang into action. Sarah's heart raced, her fear heightening as she realized that Max was about to confront the threat head-on. "Max!" Sarah shouted, but it was too late. The dog was already at the door, his teeth bared, his body trembling with a kind of wild determination that left Sarah breathless. She ran after him, her voice frantic, calling him back, but Max was already on his way out the door, his instincts completely taking over. She opened the door just in time to see Max's body flash past her, running toward the figure standing in the yard. The intruder was still, unmoving, as Max closed the distance between them. Max's eyes locked onto the stranger's form, a deep, unwavering focus, and Sarah felt a sharp pang of terror. This wasn't a typical encounter. This wasn't just a man who had wandered too close to the house. Something about this felt wrong, something that Max had recognized immediately. Max's growls had ceased now. Instead, his entire body was poised, taut with readiness. He wasn't just barking. He was guarding, he was protecting, and he was doing it with every ounce of his being. His entire focus was on the stranger, and Sarah felt her stomach turn in knots as she realized that what Max was sensing, what he was warning her about, was far more serious than she had originally thought. Max's instincts were never wrong. If he was protecting the family, then there was something out there, something that neither Sarah nor the children could see. She needed to act fast. But what if Max's instincts had led him to face something more dangerous than they could handle? What if they were all in more danger than they had ever imagined? The sound of the door crashing open echoed through the house with a force that shook the walls. Sarah's heart jumped into her throat as the intruder, masked and menacing, rushed inside. In the split second before Sarah could even react, Max's instincts kicked into overdrive. The dog was already in motion, his body a blur of power and purpose. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. Max knew exactly what he had to do. The stranger had only taken a few steps into the entryway when Max slammed into him, the sheer force of the impact sending the intruder stumbling backward, knocking over a chair in the process. Max's teeth flashed, his deep growl shaking the air as he lunged again, his powerful frame forcing the intruder to the ground. The dog's teeth sunk into the man's sleeve, holding him down as he struggled beneath Max's weight. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, her breath caught in her throat. The house, once so familiar, now felt like a battleground. The lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows as the two struggled in the doorway. But Max wasn't just trying to subdue the man. He was fighting with every ounce of strength he had. He was protecting Sarah, Caleb, and Sophie. He was their last line of defense. And Max would not let anyone threaten his family. "Max, no!" Sarah screamed, her voice breaking as she took a hesitant step forward. She wanted to pull him back, but the sight of Max's protective stance left her speechless. He wasn't just fighting, he was determined to keep them safe. The intruder, realizing he was losing ground, began to fight back, swinging a knife wildly in an attempt to break free from Max's hold. The blade caught Max's side, tearing through the fur and flesh, and the dog yelped in pain. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she saw the blood seep through Max's coat. But Max didn't flinch. He kept his hold on the intruder, his eyes locked on the man, his growl louder than ever. "Stay back!" Sarah yelled, her mind racing. She grabbed the phone from the table and dialed 911, her hands trembling so badly she could barely press the numbers. "Help! There's someone in the house and my dog he's fighting him. Please hurry." She tried to focus, but every part of her screamed to run, to protect her children, to get them to safety. But she couldn't leave Max. She couldn't leave him alone with the man who had broken into their home, the man who was trying to harm them. Max was her protector. He was their protector. And he wasn't backing down. The intruder was relentless. He kicked and punched at Max, trying to break free, but the dog refused to let go. Max's jaws locked tightly around the man's arm, keeping him pinned to the floor. Every time the intruder tried to escape, Max pushed harder, his body a barrier between the intruder and Sarah's family. Sarah could barely watch. Every time Max's body was hit, every time the man landed a blow, her heart broke. She had never seen Max like this before, not in such a fight, not in such danger. But Max was not just any dog. He wasn't just a companion. He was a fighter, a protector. And in that moment, he was fighting for their lives. The intruder's attempts to break free grew more desperate. He swung the knife again, the blade slicing through the air and catching Max's side once more. The dog let out a guttural cry, but instead of retreating, he pushed forward with more determination. Max's growls became louder, more desperate as he bit down again, his grip tightening around the man's arm. Sarah could feel her chest tightening, her breath shallow as she screamed for the intruder to stop, to leave them alone. But the man wasn't listening. The knife slashed through the air once again, and this time, Max yelped in pain as the blade struck his leg, cutting deep into the muscle. Sarah's stomach churned, and for a moment, she thought she might faint. But then she saw it, the way Max's eyes burned with intensity, the way his body never wavered, never gave up. Max was determined. He wasn't going to let this man hurt them. Not while he had a breath in his body. The intruder, finally realizing he was being overpowered, tried to crawl away, dragging himself along the floor. But Max wasn't about to let him go. With one final surge of strength, the dog lunged again, pinning the man's chest to the ground, his powerful jaws locking around the intruder's arm in a vice-like grip. Sarah's scream was heard by the 911 dispatcher on the other end of the line, but it was drowned out by the sound of the struggle. Max's fur was matted with blood now, his breathing heavy, his body covered in cuts and scratches from the fight. But still he held firm. His eyes never left the intruder, never lost their focus. This was his job, his duty, and he would see it through. The door burst open then. 2 police officers, armed and ready, rushed into the house. Max's head shot up, his body instinctively bracing itself for the next threat. But the officers were there to help, their hands raised in a peaceful gesture as they called out to Max. "Easy, boy," one of the officers said, approaching slowly. "You've done good. You've done your job." Max's growl subsided slightly, but his eyes remained locked on the intruder, his body still poised for action. Sarah rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside him. "Max," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You're okay. You're okay." The officers quickly took control of the situation, restraining the intruder and securing the house. But for Sarah, the scene was a blur. All she could focus on was Max, the dog who had put his life on the line to protect her family, to protect them all. Max's body was shaking now, the adrenaline fading, and Sarah noticed the deep cuts on his side and leg, the blood soaking into his fur. She quickly grabbed a towel from the kitchen, pressing it gently against his wounds, her tears mixing with the blood on his coat. "I'm so sorry, boy," she whispered, choking on her words. "You saved us. You saved us." Max's eyes softened as he looked up at her, his tail giving a small wag. He didn't need words to communicate the one thing he wanted her to know. He had done his job. He had protected them. And now, he was trusting her to take care of him, just as he had taken care of them. The police quickly secured the intruder, taking him into custody. The house was safe again, but the damage had been done. Sarah had nearly lost everything she held dear, her children, her home, and most of all, her loyal protector. As the officers left, taking the intruder with them, Sarah stayed by Max's side, her hands gentle on his fur. She had been terrified, but the overwhelming emotion she felt now was gratitude. Gratitude for the dog who had fought so hard to keep them safe. And, in that moment, she realized something she hadn't fully understood before. The bond between them wasn't just about companionship. It wasn't just about loyalty. It was about love, pure, unbreakable love. As Max lay beside her, exhausted and injured but still alive, Sarah knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened, no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would never take that love for granted again. The air in the room was thick with tension, a palpable heaviness that seemed to suffocate everything in its wake. Max's jaws remained firmly locked on the intruder's arm, his body trembling with effort. But the man, fighting with all the desperation of a cornered animal, fought back. His free hand reached for something at his side, and in a flash, he pulled out a knife. Max didn't hesitate for a moment. The intruder swung the blade at Max, the sharp edge flashing in the dim light of the room. It was too quick, too sudden for Sarah to react. The blade slashed through the air, and within seconds, it found its mark. Max let out a howl, a sound that struck at Sarah's core, as the blade cut deep into his side. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The blood spilled from Max's side, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she saw the injury. The deep red stain began to spread, soaking into the thick fur of his coat. But even as the knife wound tore through his flesh, Max didn't release the intruder. He held on tighter, his body straining with every ounce of strength, his loyalty to his family unwavering, his resolve unbreakable. "Max!" Sarah cried out, her voice ragged as she watched the blood seep from his side. The room seemed to close in on her, the sounds of the struggle, the intruder's frantic movements, and Max's labored breathing mixing into a chaotic storm of fear and confusion. But Max wasn't giving up. His eyes, filled with a fierce determination, remained locked on the intruder, his grip never loosening. The intruder tried to twist his arm, but Max held him down with a strength that was beyond reason. It was as if Max knew that this wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for his family's safety. For Sarah, Caleb, and Sophie. He wasn't going to let this man hurt them. He would fight to the very end. With each passing moment, the pain must have intensified. Sarah could see it in Max's eyes, in the way his body trembled, yet still, he refused to let go. He kept fighting, kept holding on to the intruder with every ounce of his being. The dog was truly a hero, more than just a pet, more than just a companion. He was a living testament to what loyalty, love, and courage truly meant. Finally, the intruder collapsed, overwhelmed by Max's relentless assault, unable to fight back any longer. The room fell eerily silent, save for the sound of Sarah's ragged breaths. She didn't know whether to feel relief or terror. The man was subdued, but the damage had been done. Max, despite his victory, collapsed to the floor, his body giving way under the strain of his injury. Sarah's heart shattered as she saw him crumple. She rushed to his side, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she tried to assess the damage. She could see the blood, so much blood, pooling around him, soaking into the hardwood floor. His breathing was shallow, each breath a struggle as his body fought to hold on. "Max!" Sarah cried, her voice raw with fear as she knelt beside him. His once bright eyes were now dull, filled with pain. He was still alive, but barely. The severity of the injury hit her like a wave, a crushing realization that sent a surge of panic through her. The knife wound was deep, too deep, and Max was losing blood far too quickly. Sarah's hands fumbled as she pressed the towel to his side, trying desperately to stop the bleeding. But it was clear that it wasn't enough. The blood continued to seep through her fingers, and her heart seemed to beat in time with the frantic rhythm of Max's breath. "Stay with me, Max," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible as she pressed her forehead against his. "Please don't leave me. You can't leave me now. You saved us. You saved all of us. Please don't leave me." Max's body shuddered beneath her touch, a small whimper escaping his lips. But his eyes, still held the same fierce determination, the same unwavering loyalty. Even in his pain, even as his strength faltered, Max's loyalty never wavered. He had done his job. He had kept them safe. But Sarah couldn't bear the thought of losing him. He was more than a dog to her. He was family. He was the lifeline that had pulled them all through the hardest times. He had given them his heart, his strength, his courage. And now, in this moment of crisis, she realized just how much she depended on him. She couldn't lose him. Not after everything. "Max, please," she whispered, her voice breaking as she continued to hold the towel against his side. "Please stay with me. I need you. The kids need you. We can't do this without you. You're our protector, you're our hero." Max's breathing grew even more shallow, and for a moment, Sarah thought he might be slipping away. Her heart ached with the thought of losing him, of losing the one thing that had kept them all together in the face of so much darkness. But then, as if hearing her desperate plea, Max's eyes flickered. A small spark of life returned to them, and with a shaky breath, he let out a soft, almost imperceptible whine. In that moment, Sarah felt the tiniest glimmer of hope. He wasn't gone. Not yet. He was still fighting. She had to fight too. She couldn't give up on him, not when he had given everything for them. "Hold on, Max," Sarah whispered through her tears. "Help is on the way. You've saved us once. Now let us save you." As the seconds ticked by, Sarah held Max in her arms, doing everything she could to stop the bleeding, to keep him from slipping away. Her heart was heavy with fear, but also with a deep sense of gratitude for the dog who had risked everything to protect them. Max was her protector. He had saved her family, and now she would do everything in her power to save him. She wasn't going to let him die, not when he had fought so hard for them. The minutes dragged on like hours, each second feeling heavier than the last. Sarah couldn't stop the tears from falling, her hands trembling as she continued to apply pressure to Max's side. His body was cold now, his breath so faint that she had to lean in close to hear it. She could feel the life slipping away from him, and with every beat of her heart, she begged for him to hold on. Just then, she heard the sirens in the distance. The paramedics were coming. But was it too late? Would they get there in time to save him? As the sound of the sirens grew louder, Sarah heard Max's breath hitch, a small whine escaping him. It wasn't the painful cry from earlier, it was something softer, something weaker. Max was struggling. Sarah could feel his pulse slowing, his body becoming limp in her arms. But then, as if summoned by the sound of the approaching help, Max's eyes opened one last time. His gaze met Sarah's, filled with love, filled with the strength he had given her. And with that final look, Max let out one last breath. His body still, his heart stilled. Sarah's world collapsed in that moment. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. All she could do was hold him, her loyal protector, in her arms and cry for the hero she had lost. Max had saved them all. And now it was her turn to save him. The days following the attack felt like a whirlwind. The world outside continued as it always did, but for Sarah, time seemed to stand still. The only thing that mattered was Max. the dog who had risked everything to protect her family. The trip to the vet was a blur of cold examination tables, antiseptic smells, and quiet conversations with the vet about the extent of Max's injuries. The deep gash in his side, the wound on his leg, it was all so much more than Sarah had ever expected to face. It wasn't just the physical pain that Max had to endure, but the emotional toll that came with it. Max had always been a fighter. Even as a puppy, when she first adopted him from the shelter, Max had shown a quiet, determined strength. But now, lying on the vet's table with his body covered in bandages, his breathing shallow, Sarah saw something different. Max was no longer the energetic dog who chased after tennis balls or guarded the house with a wagging tail. Now, he was vulnerable. And in those moments, as she sat beside him, Max looked at her with those soulful eyes that seemed to communicate everything he couldn't say in words. 4 days, Sarah barely slept, staying up with Max through the long hours of the night, keeping watch as his body struggled to heal. She would sit beside him, her hand gently stroking his fur, and listen to the sound of his labored breathing. His body trembled, and every now and then he would whimper in pain, but he never once pulled away from her. Through it all, he remained by her side, trusting her to care for him as he had cared for them. It was this unspoken bond, this unwavering loyalty, that held them together. The vet assured Sarah that Max would recover, but it was clear that the road ahead would be long and difficult. There were moments when Max's pain seemed unbearable, when he would growl softly in his sleep, his body tensing as if reliving the fight. But every time he opened his eyes, they were filled with the same quiet strength that had made him the dog he was. Despite the pain, Max never stopped looking at Sarah with those eyes that seemed to say, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Sarah had to remind herself, sometimes, that Max wasn't just a dog. He was a part of their family. He had become so much more than a pet. He was her protector, her confidant, the one who had stood by her side through thick and thin. He had saved their lives, and now it was her turn to save him. But seeing him so weak, so vulnerable, made her question everything. Could she do enough to help him heal? Could she give him the comfort he had always given her? These were the thoughts that haunted her mind as she held Max close, whispering words of encouragement, telling him how proud she was of him, how much she loved him. There were moments when Max would nudge her hand with his nose, his way of reassuring her that he was still with her, still fighting. It was these little gestures, these quiet moments of connection, that kept Sarah going. She knew that, no matter how hard the recovery process would be, they would get through it together. She would never leave him. She couldn't. Not after everything he had done for her. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah began to see small signs of progress in Max's recovery. The bandages were changed, and his wounds slowly began to heal, though the scars would remain for a lifetime. But what really struck Sarah was how Max's spirit began to shine through again. It was subtle at first, a small wag of his tail when he saw her, the way he'd gently nudge her hand for attention. And then, one day, as Sarah sat beside him, Max lifted his head, his eyes meeting hers with a glimmer of the old spark that had once been so familiar. Sarah had never realized just how much Max had become a part of her life until now. As she sat with him, his head resting in her lap, she reflected on the journey they had been through together. She remembered the day she first met him at the shelter. He had been nothing more than a scared, trembling pup, looking up at her with those wide, unsure eyes. He was nothing like the strong, confident dog he was now. He had been rescued, just like her, both of them trying to rebuild their lives after losing something important. But now, as she ran her fingers through his fur, she realized just how far they had both come. She had been broken when she first brought Max into her life, uncertain of what the future held. She had lost her husband, and the weight of raising 2 young children on her own had been overwhelming. But Max had been there, silently watching over her, never once questioning her or her needs. He had been her rock, her constant. And now, he had given everything to protect her family. He had saved them, risking his own life in the process. The depth of Max's loyalty hit her like a wave. She had always known he was special, but she hadn't realized just how much until now. She had thought she was the one looking after him, but in truth, it was Max who had been taking care of her all along. He had been there through every difficult moment, through every lonely night, and now he was still here, fighting to stay with her. "Max," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're my hero. You always have been." Max's ears perked up at the sound of her voice, and his eyes softened as he gazed up at her. Sarah's heart swelled with love for the dog who had become more than just a companion. He had become a part of her soul. And in that moment, she realized that Max wasn't just a protector. He was a symbol of everything she had been through, everything she had survived, and he was the one who had shown her what true loyalty and love meant. Sarah wasn't the same person she had been when she first adopted Max. She had grown just as Max had. And together, they had created a bond that could never be broken. As she sat beside him, her hand gently stroking his fur, Sarah made a promise to herself and to Max. She would do everything in her power to help him recover, to help him heal, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Max had given her a second chance at life, and now, it was time for her to give him the same. As the weeks passed, the physical healing process for Max was slow but steady. The deep cuts on his side and leg began to close up, the stitches dissolving as the wounds gradually healed. But for Sarah, it wasn't just about the physical recovery, it was about the emotional healing that they both needed. The trauma of the attack had affected them both in ways that were hard to put into words. Max had been the one to protect them, to give everything he had in the fight to save them. And now, Sarah had to be the one to help him recover, physically and emotionally. The days seemed to stretch on endlessly, but there were small moments, moments of quiet reflection, that gave Sarah hope. As she walked alongside Max, his pace slower than usual but determined nonetheless, she felt the weight of the past few weeks lift off her shoulders. The fresh air in the park, the soft rustle of the leaves in the trees, and the sound of Max's paws gently tapping against the ground as they walked together brought a sense of peace. It was as if the world was starting to breathe again, starting to heal. Max's presence, as always, was comforting. His big brown eyes, once filled with pain, now seemed to gleam with a quiet sense of strength. Every day, he grew a little stronger, a little more confident. And with each step, Sarah could feel her own heart healing too. The trauma they had faced together, his sacrifice, the danger they had narrowly escaped, had brought them even closer than before. The bond between them had always been strong, but now it was unbreakable. Sarah found herself reflecting often on what it meant to have Max in her life. She thought back to the days when she first adopted him, how he had been a shy, trembling pup, unsure of the world around him. Back then, she had been struggling herself, lost in the grief of losing her husband and the overwhelming weight of raising her children alone. But Max had been there, always by her side, offering his silent comfort. He had become her protector, her loyal companion, and now he was more than just a dog. He was family. As the two of them walked side by side, Sarah took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. She smiled softly as Max looked up at her, his eyes filled with trust. This was their time. Time to heal, time to rebuild, and time to appreciate the quiet moments that life had to offer. They didn't need to speak. Their bond was more than enough. Each step they took together was a testament to the strength of their relationship. One afternoon, as they walked through the park, Sarah paused for a moment to watch Max as he playfully chased a butterfly. His movements were still a little slow, a little stiff, but there was a joy in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Max had always been protective, but now he seemed to be more at peace with himself, more at ease with the world around him. It was as if he had come to terms with what had happened, and in doing so, had become stronger for it. For Sarah, that moment was a turning point. She had always known that Max was special, but now she realized just how much he had given her. Max had saved her life, not just from the intruder that night, but from the isolation and darkness that had clouded her existence after her husband's death. He had been her constant, her light in the darkness, and now, as she watched him chase that butterfly, she realized that their bond was more than just owner and pet. They were a team. They were a family. Sarah thought about the years she had spent feeling alone, the days when she had felt like she was barely holding on. But Max had always been there, offering his quiet support, his unwavering loyalty. And now, in the aftermath of everything that had happened, she felt stronger than she had in years. She had Max by her side, and together, they could face whatever the world threw at them. "Max," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "You've given me so much. You saved my life, and now we're stronger than ever. We've been through so much together, but I know that whatever comes next, we'll face it together. I'll always be here for you, just like you've always been here for me." Max stopped chasing the butterfly and trotted over to Sarah, his tail wagging gently as he leaned into her side. It was as if he understood every word she had said. And in that moment, Sarah knew that they were more than just dog and owner. They were partners, a team. And no matter what came their way, they would face it together. Max's recovery had brought a sense of clarity to Sarah. She realized that she had been living in the shadows for far too long, stuck in the pain of her past. But now, with Max by her side, she had found a new purpose. She had found the strength to move forward, to live in the present, and to appreciate the love that surrounded her. Max had given her that gift. The gift of perspective, the gift of gratitude. They had both healed in their own way. Max had healed physically, and Sarah had healed emotionally. They were no longer the same people they had been when they first met. They were stronger, more resilient, and more connected than ever before. They had faced the darkness together, and now they were stepping into the light. The bond they shared was unbreakable. And as they walked through the park, side by side, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. She knew that whatever the future held, she and Max would face it together. They had already overcome the hardest challenge of their lives, and now, with each step they took, they were rebuilding their lives, one moment at a time. It was a quiet morning when the letter arrived. The kind of morning that seemed too perfect to be interrupted. Max, now fully recovered, was lying by Sarah's side on the porch, his body relaxed in the sun's warm rays. The past weeks had been full of healing, physically, mentally, and emotionally. They had been rebuilding their lives together, and it seemed that, at last, they could breathe again. Max was back to his playful self, bounding around the yard and chasing after sticks with the children. Life was finally returning to normal. But just as Sarah thought they had found their rhythm again, a single letter arrived that would shake everything up. The letter was thick, official-looking, with a government seal on the front. Sarah furrowed her brow, curious but cautious. She had no idea what it could be. As she tore it open, she began to read, the words catching her attention immediately. "Dear Sarah Henderson, we are writing to offer your dog, Max, an extraordinary opportunity to join our K9 unit as a trained police dog. After observing his performance in protecting you and your family, we believe that Max possesses exceptional skills that could be invaluable to our department. We would like to train him in specialized duties, including narcotics detection, search and rescue operations, and suspect apprehension. This training, however, would require him to be stationed at our facility for a period of time, and his duties would take him away from home for extended periods. Please let us know if you are interested in discussing this opportunity further. Sincerely, K9 Unit Coordinator." Sarah's hands shook slightly as she finished reading. She blinked, her mind trying to process the words, trying to understand the enormity of the decision that now lay before her. Max, her protector, her loyal companion, was being offered the chance to work as a K9 officer. The same dog who had saved her life, who had guarded their home, was now being asked to leave them for a different kind of duty. A duty that would take him away from her, perhaps for days, perhaps for weeks at a time. She stared at the letter for a long time, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. This was a remarkable opportunity for Max, one that he deserved. He had already shown his courage and loyalty, but now the world wanted to recognize his talents, to give him a purpose beyond being just a pet. It was a chance for Max to be more than a dog. He could become a hero in a way that went beyond the confines of their home. But what did that mean for Sarah? What would it mean to have Max leave? Would she be able to handle it? She couldn't imagine her life without him, couldn't picture the days ahead without the warmth of his body by her side, the steady rhythm of his breath as he slept on the floor beside her bed. Max had become more than a dog to her. He had become family. How could she send him away? The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Sarah found herself walking through the house in a daze, the letter clutched tightly in her hand. Max was lying on the couch, his head resting on his paws, watching her with those deep, knowing eyes. He could sense her unease, and though he couldn't understand the exact cause, he stayed close, as if offering his silent support. Each time Sarah looked at Max, a new wave of doubt washed over her. She knew deep down that this opportunity was good for him. Max was intelligent, driven, and courageous, everything a K-9 officer needed to be. He could do so much good in the world, helping people, saving lives, just as he had saved hers. And yet, the thought of him being gone for any amount of time felt like a betrayal. How could she send him off into a world that would take him away from her, knowing that their bond was built on moments like this? The quiet companionship, the comforting presence, the protection he provided without hesitation. Max had been there through everything. He had been her rock when she felt like the world was falling apart. He had pulled her from the depths of loneliness and sadness after losing her husband, and he had never left her side. And now she was supposed to let him go? It felt like a cruel joke, like the universe was testing her. Could she truly be selfless enough to support Max's future, even if it meant letting him leave? Or was she being selfish, holding on to him out of fear and insecurity, afraid to lose the one thing that had kept her grounded? Sarah spent hours lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, the decision weighing heavily on her. She knew how important this opportunity was for Max. He had proven time and time again that he was capable of great things. But she also knew how much she depended on him. He wasn't just a dog. He was her protector, her friend, the one who had been with her through every trial, every loss. How could she choose between the future he deserved and the life they had built together? When Sarah tried to talk to her friends or family about it, she couldn't find the right words. They all saw it as a great opportunity for Max, but they didn't understand the bond they shared, the way Max had woven himself into the fabric of her life. To them, he was just a dog. But to her, he was everything. One evening, as she sat in the living room, Max curled up at her feet, Sarah reached for the letter again. Her heart was heavy with the weight of the decision. She thought of all the times Max had saved her, not just physically, but emotionally. She thought of how he had pulled her from the depths of despair and given her something to live for. She owed him everything. And yet, she couldn't help but feel guilty for even considering letting him go. Max's head lifted, his ears twitching as if he could sense her inner turmoil. He slowly padded over to her side, his eyes full of understanding, as though he knew what she was thinking. He nuzzled her hand gently, and in that moment, Sarah knew what she had to do. Max deserved this. He deserved to have a purpose, to be recognized for his bravery and loyalty. But at the same time, Sarah knew that she couldn't hold him back. She couldn't be selfish, not when it came to something so important. She took a deep breath and made her decision. Max would go. But she would make sure that no matter where he went, he would always know how much he meant to her. And their bond, this unbreakable, unspoken connection, would never change. She would support him as he had supported her. And together, they would face the next chapter of their lives. The days that followed were filled with a quiet intensity as Sarah continued to weigh her options. The letter from the K-9 unit still sat on the kitchen counter, unopened for the most part, but always present, a reminder of the crossroads she had reached in her life. Max was recovering, his body healed, his spirit almost fully restored. Yet there was an undeniable shift in the air. The world had changed, and so had their lives. Max was no longer just her dog. He was being called to something bigger, something that could take him away from her. She couldn't ignore it any longer. The offer to train Max as a K-9 officer was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and Sarah knew that Max deserved it. He was brave, intelligent, and more than capable of serving in a role that required the utmost loyalty, courage, and dedication. It was the kind of future that would honor everything he had done for her and her family. But how could she let him go? How could she possibly send him into a life that would tear him away from her after everything he had done for them? Each night, Sarah wrestled with this question. The weight of the decision grew heavier with each passing day. She knew that keeping Max close, keeping him by her side, was a choice made out of love and fear. But she also knew that love, real, selfless love, meant letting go when it was time. Max had given her everything, and now it was time for her to give him the chance to follow his calling. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Sarah sat in the quiet of the living room, Max lying at her feet. He was calm, relaxed, his tail thumping softly against the floor in contentment. She stroked his fur gently, lost in thought. Max had always been there for her, protecting, comforting, and loving her in ways that no one else could. He had been her constant in a world that felt uncertain and fragile. But the thought of him leaving, of him being out in the world on his own, made her stomach churn with anxiety. The decision was too big, too life-changing, for her to make lightly. But as she looked at Max, seeing the same dog who had jumped in front of her when the intruder attacked, the same dog who had given everything to protect her, Sarah realized something. Max wasn't just a dog. He wasn't a pet or a companion. He was a protector, a hero. And heroes had to rise to the challenges before them, even if it meant taking risks. It was time for Max to be more than just her dog. It was time for him to fulfill his potential. Through the tears that welled in her eyes, Sarah made her decision. She would let him go. She would let Max pursue his future as a K-9 officer, knowing that their bond would never break. It wasn't about keeping him close. It was about supporting him in every way possible. With a deep breath, Sarah reached for the letter on the counter. She carefully opened it, her hands trembling. She would send a response, saying yes. Max would take the opportunity that awaited him. She wouldn't hold him back. And though it hurt more than anything she had ever felt, she knew it was the right choice. Max had earned this chance. The days that followed were filled with a bittersweet mix of emotions. Sarah felt a deep ache in her heart as she watched Max train, watching him grow into his new role. She was proud of him, more proud than she could express. But each time she looked at him, she was reminded of the quiet moments they had shared, of the bond they had forged over years of companionship. The final day came sooner than Sarah expected. She stood in the yard, watching as Max stood tall at the K-9 unit, dressed in his K-9 vest, ready for his new role. Her heart swelled with pride and sadness all at once. She had made the right decision, she told herself, but it didn't make it any easier. "Max," she whispered softly as she approached him one last time, her hands gently resting on his head. "You've always been my protector. You've always been my hero. But now, it's time for you to be someone else's hero. I'm so proud of you." Max's eyes softened as he looked at her. For a moment, he seemed to understand, as though he knew the significance of the moment. His tail wagged gently, and he nuzzled her hand, as if reassuring her that everything would be okay. Sarah smiled through her tears. "You'll always be my Max. You'll always be my hero." As Max trotted by her side, Sarah felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. He had been with her through the darkest moments of her life, and now he was stepping into a future where he could do even more. Their journey together had been one of love, loss, and triumph. No matter what came next, Sarah knew they would always have each other. Max looked up at her, his eyes bright and full of determination. He was ready for this new chapter, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And though Sarah's heart ached with the thought of him leaving, she knew one thing for sure: their bond was unbreakable. Nothing, not time or distance, could ever change that. "You've made me whole, Max," Sarah whispered as they walked side by side, the sun setting on their time together. "You've shown me what true love and loyalty are. And no matter where you go or how far apart we are, I will always be with you. You will always be a part of me." As they reached the gate of the K9 unit, Sarah stopped for a moment and looked back at Max. He trotted beside her, his tail wagging with a quiet confidence, ready for whatever came next. She knew he was no longer just a dog. He was a hero, a protector, and a part of something bigger. And as Max turned to face his future, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace settle in her heart. No matter what the future held, they would always have each other. Their bond, forged through trials and triumphs, would never be broken. It would stand the test of time, a love that was more than just words or actions. It was a connection that transcended everything else. And with that thought, Sarah said goodbye, knowing that Max would forever be her hero, no matter where his journey took him.